cloud. So if you ask any questions, please just know that this could wind up on the internet somewhere, and so you might want to not be talking about your own financial details and things. If you're asking a question that you're nervous about the information getting out, not expected to. This is not going to be something that's going to be viewed by millions of people, but might be viewed by tens of people. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I guess first of all, so I'm Neil McCurdy, and today I'm presenting to you as the father of a student who's in college, and the father of a student who is currently applying to college. And so it's amazing how much the college landscape changes when you actually go through it yourself, and all the things that we send out an email and say, hey, don't forget to do the FAFSA, and we hit enter and like, okay, good. Kids will do that. And then as a parent, when you actually try to do the FAFSA, you realize that, wow, this was not an easy task, and it's a pain in the butt to do. And but when you're getting free money, then it is worth doing. So let's actually, I'm gonna, for those of you who have seen previous versions of this talk, so I gave one last year when my daughter had just been accepted to college. And so I was like, hey, let me actually tell the parents the stuff that I discovered. I want to give you kind of an update first. So if you want to check out, because you already know the rest of what I'm going to say, you'll know that you're not missing any of the new details. So, so first, just a little bit of a background. So my family was mostly single income. My wife was working part-time when we first went through the college application process. And I'm a high school administrator, so living in San Diego, we all have to be crazy wealthy in order to afford a house now, but I bought my house a long time ago, so I'm one of those lucky ones. But kind of middle of the road income, worried that you know, we were going to be paying for college ourselves and that we weren't going to receive any financial aid at all. And so I was really surprised when my daughter applied to schools. So she applied to all the state schools. She applied to University of Oregon and Oregon State, neither of which are the WUI schools. So WUI is a Western, I don't know what it stands for, but it's basically allows for states that are on the West to all reciprocate in terms of in-state tuition. So the tuition is a lot less. The challenge is that there aren't many schools that actually are WUI schools. And so neither Oregon State or University of Oregon is.
Western Undergraduate Exchange.
Western Undergraduate Exchange, that makes sense. But so the first kind of little cool thing that happened, my daughter applied to Oregon State and University of Oregon, and that was one of her first acceptances. And they gave her a WUI scholarship. So it's not a WUI school, but they basically said, we're going to let you get the same tuition as an in-state tuition. So so even though a school might not be a WUI school, maybe they have the scholarship. And so just kind of keep that in mind. So don't leave this talk thinking, okay, I'm only going to apply to Cal State schools, or I'm only going to apply to UC schools because that's all we can afford. Sometimes these schools that are further afield might work out for you. So fast forward, yeah. Oh, thank you. So fast forward to this year, and my son really wants to go to Oregon, and so he's applying to. I think he's going to apply to Oregon State too. So he would love to go to University of Oregon. So I think if he gets in, that would probably be the school that he goes to. Don't know if he's going to get the WUI scholarship or not. And so that's going to be the deal breaker for him. We're not going to pay for that much money for that caliber of a school. If it's the WUI scholarship, then it does make sense. So so the WUI scholarship was really cool. So the other thing that wound up happening with my daughter is that she's an actress and her dream program was getting into the BFA program at USC, which is a super elite, barely anyone gets in. It's like winning the lottery in order to get into that particular program. And that was the last school that she heard from. And so she already had her heart set on going to UCLA, paying in-state tuition. And then lo and behold, she gets the USC offer letter for this BFA program. And so we had already talked about it. It's like, wow, this is a 1 in a million chance. Okay, we're gonna pay the ridiculous amounts of money. We'll mortgage everything in order to allow her to go. And so this was the big surprise for us. So we were thinking that we're relatively well off. We're, kind of middle income. We're usually the ones that get stuck. We're paying for full college because we're not super wealthy and can't afford it, but we really can't afford it. And it turns out that USC gave her not a scholarship, it was just the regular financial aid, gave her a scholarship that made USC cost the same as UCLA, which was crazy. And so then it made it was a done deal. No way that she could possibly choose her non-dream school over her dream school. So fast forward to now, and so the update for this year is that that was just that 1 year. And so lots has changed.
The scholarship.
It wasn't a scholarship, it's financial aid. You gotta reapply every year. And so the first thing that was super scary is that we kind of we weren't really on it. We weren't really like, oh, she's already in college, not that big deal. So FAFSA around October, I'm sending out the emails to parents here saying, hey, don't forget to fill out your FAFSA. And I was like, wait, we have to do that too. So I don't know how you remember to do that if you're not a high school administrator who's reminding people to fill out the FAFSA. So just know that that's something that you're going to have to do. Then we filled out the FAFSA. I'm like, okay, cool. She finished her first year of college. She's home. Now she's doing all of her traveling, summer travels. And I kept saying, hey, isn't there more that you have to do with financial aid? And it turned out, yeah, there's a heck of a lot more that she had to do with financial aid at USC, because I remembered the previous year that fill out the FAFSA, then she got admitted. Then we had to just fill out form after form after form because they wanted to know everything. So every possible form that was on your tax return, they wanted to know everything. And by the way, all of this information doesn't go to the parent. It all goes to the student. So make sure that you're on your students because they're the ones getting these emails and reminding them about FAFSA and reminding them about financial aid and reminding them about all the forms that still need to be done. So my daughter is traveling around, loses her phone in the summer, can't connect to USC anymore because it's a two-factor authentication. And so we had basically the month of May and half of June was us doing nothing for financial aid. I'm getting really nervous because we can't afford a full tuition at USC. And so I'm wondering if are we too late? And so we actually got the bill for her this fall's tuition. We got the full bill. and I'm like, I don't know. They haven't given us our decision letter for this year yet. They gave it to us because we were so late in this process. They gave it to us about a week before she actually started. She was actually already moved in, and they finally gave us the decision letter. And so it wound up going. The aid decreased because we made a little bit more money this not this year and not last year, 2 years ago. We made a little bit more money because it's always 2 years in arrears that they're looking. And so the thing that we've got to be really careful about is managing, this is all of us, is your financial picture now the same as, or is it going to be the same 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years into the future? Because you can't guarantee that that decision that you made is still going to be financially viable in the future. So a couple more things about that. So last year, I reported that one of the tricks, if you've got grandparent income or uncle income or whatever other stuff in a 529, you don't got to be careful about when that money actually gets transferred over to the kid, when that actually gets used to pay for school, because that all counts as part of your income once you actually take it. So they don't know about it until you actually start using it. And so the thing that we are now a little bit nervous about, but at least we got 2 good years, 2 inexpensive years out of USC. The recommendation is do not use any of the 529s until the spring semester of the second year. So we've been paying for the first year and this first semester. So we paid for that without using any of the grandparent money, without using any of the 529s. And the idea is that at that point, they've got another 2 years of school. And those 2 years are looking at 2 years prior tax returns.
So
And
that
they
spring
never,
of sophomore year won't be included in their
yeah,
calculation.
yeah. And so, so that's the trick. What I noticed this last year when we applied for financial aid, there were a whole bunch of questions like, has your income changed? This year. And so I don't know. I mean, next year we're gonna have to say, so this year we can say no. Next year we're gonna have to say yes. Because so that's the other thing. So my wife went from working part-time to working full-time, partially. So that was always our plan. That's how we're gonna pay for college. But that means that now our financial picture has adjusted. And so now we're gonna potentially have less financial aid. Throw my son into the mix now, though.
Oh,
And
that's
so
a
this is where things are like so confusing. So he's also going to be going to college. And so there's only a certain amount of money that people expect you to pay. And so there's this expected family contribution calculation that they do. And so 2 kids in college at the same time. So it's great. So Stroms, you guys are gonna have two twins in college at the same time. That's actually good for you because they don't expect you to pay, they say, okay, you can afford, $40,000, $50,000, but you can't afford $100,000. And so they give you some extra money in order to help you out.
We'll
Actually,
actually have-
Stroms are gonna have 3, right?
We'll have 3 in, we'll have 3 in at the same time, yes.
Yeah, nice, good planning. So the funny thing is that and I wish this is the stuff that they told you, so you shouldn't actually think about your life this way, but my brother and I were 4 years apart. Oh, perfect, because we're, not in high school at the same time, not in college at the same time. And when my kids are all 3 years apart, I'm like, oh, shoot, that's really gonna suck when they overlap in college. But it turns out that you actually want them to overlap in college because then you pay less. Yeah. So those are kind of the updates that I wanted to cover. It's one of those it's a game where you don't know. You're using information, you don't have complete information. And so you can't really plan. You can kind of make your best guess at what you should do and hope. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now is we're hoping that, all of our plans for how to actually afford the 4 years at USC are actually going to work out. And of course, we'll do what we need to do in order to make it happen. And if we have to mortgage the house, then we'll mortgage the house because we're not going to pull my daughter out in her senior year of school. So, but it's something that you want to be thinking about is that just because you got that financial aid offer in the beginning does not necessarily mean that you're going to have that for forever.
So is it your kid's junior year is the 2 years before you're applying, or is it's actually this year? If it's sophomore year, if your kids are sophomores right now, this is the tax year they're gonna look at, correct?
For that first year, yeah.
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 So right now, for people who have sophomores out there, this is the year they're gonna look at how much you make. Correct?
Except that,
No one would know that, like,
Yeah.
you don't, like. you said,
Sophomores, you mean they look at your taxes from 3 years ago?
No, it's 2 years before you apply.
it's,
Right?
so I just did next year's and they were asking for 21, 22 tax returns.
Right, so
You
it'll be
do
this
tax
year.
two tax returns, because it's really 21.
21, sorry, yeah, and that's the weird thing is that we think in schools as fiscal years,
Right.
but it's really the calendar year is the thing that matters, yeah, so they're looking at the 2021 tax returns for the next
Okay.
school year, which is 23.
So they'll be looking at 22 for our kids when they are graduating and applying their senior year.
Yeah.
They're gonna look at that now.
Yeah.
Well, spring, in January. Right?
So I think
22.
starting in January,
Yes.
that's the year that's
So
gonna matter.
don't make any money starting in January if you have a sophomore.
Yeah. But then also,
No.
but then also you can't make any more money after that. So here's the other thing to
Well,
know.
it depends on the school. So Justin is at NAU and he got a scholarship all 4 years. And the tuition will not change in the 4 years.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
some schools, like Arizona, I guess, is, that one, I didn't even know that until we started looking into it.
Yeah.
But ask when you're looking at schools, listen closely to their financial aid because some of them do offer things like that.
Yeah.
And that's a huge benefit. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? You're not gonna raise the tuition in 4 years?
No.
Not for my son.
So-
Now, is
so-
that password form, is that the form that all the schools use? That's kind of, you sent all your.
You gotta start with the FAFSA and then every school has a little addendum thing that they. do.
And they're all gonna start.
And we're gonna talk about that in a little bit more detail. That was stuff that I covered last year, and so I wanted to, so we will be a little bit organized here in a second, but. So the other thing that so I know we're talking about a crazy expensive school right now, and I know that probably there are some people on this call who are in the category of like, whoa, we can't afford any of this. You're actually in the best situation. And it drives me crazy when we've got these kids who are low income, who don't apply for school. Because those are the ones, when you fill out your FAFSA and your income is low, that means you're basically getting almost complete free ride to any of these schools. And so my daughter's best friend wound up going to UCLA. And she's got a free ride for basically the 4 years, well, the first year. She's got to apply, and so as long as there's no income change. And so it's the tricky part is that you kind of have to expect if you've got a kind of a living wage in San Diego, you've got to expect that you're probably going to have to pay for a Cal State or UC tuition.
Which is what?
So it's roughly, so when they say all in, it's roughly about 40,000 per year. Which is a lot. So that's for the UCs, the Cal States are, the Cal States
Wait.
are cheaper.
What's 40,000? You're saying that they consider a low income under 40,000? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that the cost, the all-in tuition cost is roughly about 40,000.
Oh, I see.
Room and board, books, kid living on their own, all the expenses that come with that.
Is that a semester or?
That's for the entire year.
Year.
Yeah, and the Cal States are quite a bit cheaper than that. So I don't know what that, Eric, do you happen to know what that number is? Is that like 30? All in?
I think UC is actually more like 45, and I think the CSUs are more like 35.
Okay.
It's somewhere in there. You were mentioning a couple of times the income level, at what point it is tuition free. I know that the income level at UC is 80,000 a year. So if the family income is less than 80,000 a year, it's tuition free at UC.
So your family has to be making less than 80,000 a year to qualify to be considered low income? Or
That is their tuition free,
Their
which I think the
benchmark.
program's name, but it's something like that.
If you're making less than that, you probably can't afford to live here.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a couple of interesting tidbits. So I think that number for So for Stanford, I think that number is like 150,000 or something like that. And so what the kind of the next point that I want to make is you want to find, so we got lucky that USC happens to be a high endowment school. And Stanford is another example of a high endowment school. So they've got lots of money. They're looking to help people. They want the best of the best. And so they're willing to give people assistance in order to come to those schools. One of my daughter's friends, super bright kid, got into a lot of schools, all on the East Coast, all these small schools. He's not super high income, got $0 to support him. These are all $60,000, $70,000 a year schools. And so he wound up staying local and going to San Diego State because he could not afford that. And they didn't have the money to match what USC was matching for us.
Yeah.
And so it does make a difference to if you're going to be going private and looking private, you either need to be somebody you need to be a super stellar candidate that's way above what they're normally recruiting so that you get a scholarship, which is totally, that's another way to kind of game the system is, a degree is a degree. And so if you're going to get a really, decent education at a school that's maybe not as high a tier as you're capable of going to, it's, getting the free education at a small
Or you can
school.
transfer later on.
True, yeah, so you could do the first 2 years there and then transfer. Yeah. Yeah, and don't forget too, that you could also do 2 years at community college here in the Promise program, totally free, and then transfer. That's another perfectly reasonable decision to make. Again, though, if you happen to be a lower income, know that you probably were gonna not have to pay that much at one of the UCs or the Cal States anyway. And so, don't make the decision to go to community college for financial reasons until you've, realize that you can't afford the other school. And there's also a whole bunch of, assistance for even applying for those schools as well. So if the application fee is the thing that's preventing you from applying, don't let that be.
So how much are application fees?
It's
Excellent.
shoot, it's like 60 per UC, I think is what it is.
60,
$60.
$60.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're,
$60.
I mean, they're pretty small cost in the overall scheme of.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But it adds up.
adds up.
Yeah.
Because
when-
if you're applying
You
to
apply to
10
10
schools,
schools,
then
now
you
you
go.
Yeah.
$600 worth of
Yeah.
applications.
And so that was, my daughter wound up applying to far too many schools, had a huge amount of stress because she was applying to so many schools and was trying to get every essay exactly right. But it's, I don't know that she would have changed anything. Not knowing where she is now, I think she probably still would have done that because you don't know. Like maybe that University of Oregon or that Oregon State is going to be the only option, and you don't want to not get into that school. So you still gotta pay for the application fee, and you still gotta do the work of actually applying.
So these are reduced costs. What are scholarships that our students can apply for? What's out there?
So I know that there are people who are the scholarship, kings and queens who they just, there's all the stories of I got, $200,000 in scholarships and they're all in these $1,000 increments. And when you think about the amount of time, so if you're really good at writing an essay and you're a really good writer, they always say that nobody applies to these things. And so just apply and maybe you'll be the one that gets it. And I think a lot of people are like, $1,000, that's not worth it. And, but if you think about, wow, that took me an hour, I'm not getting paid $1,000 an hour. So I don't know why, Lucas thinks that he's so cool, but he doesn't. he can, his time is worth more than $1,000 an hour. And so, but it's really hard to make the justification. I was in the same boat with my daughter applying. It just didn't feel worth it.
There's a lot of work just to apply.
Yeah.
The right, the schools are not do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So, but there's always stories of people who, figure it out and do it. What sucks is that, well, I don't know if this is a true statement or not. So some income is basically counts against the FAFSA. So if you can pay in other ways, then that actually deducts from what you can get in the FAFSA. So two things I want to mention real fast. I see you're about to ask a question. So the decision for my wife to go back to work, it was one of those things where like, oh, okay, we'll make more money, but we're just gonna be giving that money to USC, so is it really worth it? And the answer is yes, it's yes, you're making more money, but the way to kind of think about it is that there's about a 12% additional tax. And there's a 20% additional tax for the kid. So if the kid's making money, then that expected family contribution, they take 20% of that kid's earnings. But even that's a question. It's like, well, I'm going to work a summer job. I'm going to make a bunch of money so I can pay for college, and then you get taxed on that money, and then also FAFSA now looks at that as income. So was that really worth it? One of the cool benefits of the financial aid, and yeah, this actually made USC cheaper for us than UCLA. So she also got a work study program, and the work study is none of that money is taxed. I think she just got a raise this year, so I think she's making $18 an hour. She works about 12 to 20 hours a week, and that income that she's getting from that basically covers. We're paying for food, but anything else that she does, she's just, she never asks us for money, which is nice. And so there was, I don't know, some, I'm thinking about all the costs of having your kid at home, and you're buying them food, and they're taking them to soccer practices and all these other things. So there's a whole bunch of costs to actually having the kid live at home. And those will all disappear for us. So yeah, we have this extra burden that we're paying for college. But the housing costs at USC, because she was a really good, considerate kid and chose the cheapest housing option, that wound up being cheaper than UCLA's. She wound up having 0 book costs because of her major. So all these, so what they say, add $20,000 for all these extra expenses. I think for her, it really wound up being, for us, about $6,000 to $8,000 extra. So it's tuition plus $6,000 to $8,000. So, and that's another thing that I think is worth thinking about, is the cost of living of where you're actually going. And so I went to UCSD. It's hard for me to imagine in San Diego with housing prices and rent prices in San Diego. It's hard for me to imagine that there's any inexpensive housing near UCSD that kids are going to. And so, and the same is probably true. Well, UCLA actually guarantees 4 years of housing. But maybe go to a smaller town where the housing prices are not crazy, and so the rents won't be crazy, and so that will help reduce the cost. That's another. I mean, so USC, I'm like painting this as this dream school, and I actually hated USC before she went, but I actually kind of like it now. It's in a super depressed part of LA, and so when she does finally
Housing's
move off campus, housing is cheap. So maybe not very safe, but it's cheap.
yeah, safety goes down, but
But then they have other things to compensate for the safety. So they give them free Uber drive rides and things like that
Yeah.
within a certain radius of campus. And so they're keeping the kids safe, keeping them from drinking and driving. And so there's lots of other benefits that come with that too. So anyway, that's kind of my update. I wasn't expecting my update to take that long. So I apologize that it was kind of, jumping around all over the place a little bit, but that's I guess, no, I've got one more thing to update you on. So my daughter has not yet done her FAFSA, so she's got a show this weekend, and so she's all stressed about that. So we have not been able to get her to focus on doing her FAFSA, but my son just did his FAFSA over the weekend. And my goodness, this is just as hellish as I remember it last year. And here I thought, okay, I've done this once before. I know how to play this game. And so the problem is that the kid has to start the FAFSA. The parents also have to be involved because the parents are the ones that have all the tax information. And so at some point in the FAFSA process, it says, okay, parents, now you need to log in. And so I remember last year we're so confused, like I got an email address, I got a parent login, but it's not connecting to my daughter. So this year I was like, hey, cool, I've got my username and password, I saved it off. And so I type in the username and password and it says, it just fails. It doesn't even give me an error message. And so then I log directly into the FAFSA account using my username and password. And it turns out that every year they make you recertify everything. And so there was an actual message there saying, hey, you need to recertify. Are you ready to do this now? And I basically had to say, yes, that's my address. Yes, 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 yes. Submit. And then that login and password would work. And so what's interesting is that even me being the quote unquote expert here, even though I was able to tie my account to the IRS and have all of those fields automatically entered, it still asked for how much did you make? How much did your wife make? And so I was like, I just like you pull it from my
It's automated.
1040 and so I still had to go find my tax return and type in that amount. And this was just the first part of it, because then when USC's process comes around, now they ask for a billion other forms and they want actual copies of the W-2s and actual copies of the 1040 and so,
Put your patient hat on, basically.
yeah.
So all that stuff, because I linked it with the IRS too, so you're still gonna have to send them the actual documents.
It's depending on the school.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It'll be
So-
all automated.
So I guess the bottom line is just know that you as the parent are gonna have some involvement in this that you might not expect. But it's worth it because you're getting free money. And just keep telling yourself that this is better than paying the money, because none of us are worth, our time is not, that 1 hour. I'm not making $20,000 an hour, so I should probably actually spend the time doing it. All right, so let me pause for a second. So any questions on any of the stuff that I just said? And it's possible that when I go look through my notes of the other things I want to say, that maybe we're done. But I think that there's some other things I want to say too. I guess.
Neil, one of the things
Sorry.
one of the things I was thinking of adding is that there was a lot of discussion about financial aid, but there's also the merit scholarship that these schools offer. And I just know from our experience from last year that we were told that if your kid is applying to schools where they match the top 5 to 10% of their profile. So they're at the top of the kids that typically apply to that school. There's a good chance that they'll offer merit aid. And we definitely saw that from the ones our daughter applied to. There were a couple of schools that she honestly would have never dreamed of going to until they recruited her because they really, really wanted her. And that is definitely sometimes to think about when you're looking at the different schools. Some of these lesser known schools, if your kid hits the upper end of their profile, they may offer a lot of money.
Yeah.
And typically that money is guaranteed for all 4 years.
Yeah, that was what happened with Justin. It
Yeah.
was a merit scholarship.
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes the decision hard because my daughter had the same situation where she got the schools that really wanted her, and so they gave her the nice merit scholarship, and then you're like, whoa, that's like you're throwing away. That's a lot of money when you think about it.
So kids need to get good grades, and do well in school,
Yeah.
work hard,
and
that's merit.
and stand out. So I think that's the other kind of message I should probably deliver tonight. So especially for the students who are listening or for the parents who want to deliver this to their students. All of the stuff that the passion projects that we talked about at the school. Those are the things that help the essays just get written. And it's interesting because I was a little worried about my son's application process because he was a soccer player and just loved soccer. And so his whole life was playing soccer. And then he decided this year that he doesn't want to play soccer. So that's not a very interesting college essay. I really
can
love
be.
this thing.
It can be. Write about why you choose to not want to continue.
Yeah, and so what's interesting is that he actually did develop a passion last year. One that it was funny because it was there all along and I just kind of like, yeah, that's okay, yeah, that's funny. He's actually a really good photographer and his passion now is photography and he's written some killer essays about photography. Much better than what his soccer essays would have been. Because, you know, there's lots of people who play soccer and how do you write a really good essay about a sport? It's more of a show me, don't tell me, right? And so anyway, his photography is it's been this kind of catalyst for all kinds of really exciting things that he's doing. And the funny thing is that he was toying with the idea of quitting soccer a few years ago. And I said, well, I need you to be doing something. I'm not just gonna, like, idle kids is not a good combination. And so I need you to be doing something. You can't just quit soccer and do nothing. And he said, well, how about I do some photography? And so what I was imagining him was, you know, walking around the streets, like taking a photo every once in a while and then doing whatever else kids shouldn't be doing. And so I probably killed that passion in him initially. But yeah, maybe I let it burn a little bit hotter because when he finally did quit soccer and really did invest his all into photography, it's turned out well. I don't remember where I was going with that originally because I was going to compare.
Stand out.
So you need to have something, you know, some kind of compelling story to tell. If you're like, you know, you get really good grades, and then it's like, there's only so many ways that you can say, oh, I get really good grades in an essay, and it's really hard to look different and to stand out. But if you've got some really cool passion project that you've done, or some club that you've started, and something that's a really interesting story, that makes you stand out from the crowd and makes you look a lot more impressive.
Can we ask a
So let's
question?
actually, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, we were just, maybe you're gonna cover this, but we were just wondering about the SATs and the ACTs.
Yeah, good. I was just about to jump into that as a segue, because that was something that I knew was on my list of things to talk about. So the big challenge with any applications this year is that it's really hard to differentiate yourself. And so what I imagine happens, and I don't know this to be the fact, but I imagine that they wind up with probably, you know, there's 10,000 spots that they're giving, and they probably have 30,000 people who are all basically equal now because they don't have very many data points to differentiate the students. And so it really feels very random which kids get into which schools. And so I'm sure you guys have probably been reading stories about this kid who was all AP and took, you know, was an amazing student and didn't get into any of the UCs, and so is winding up going to community college. And the answer is, the only answer is that in this world where it feels like it's kind of a crapshoot whether or not you're going to get into the school, the answer is to apply to lots of schools. And because somewhere in that random ranking where you're like, are you in the top 10,000 or the bottom 10,000 of that 30,000 when it gets randomized, you need to, you win that game by applying to a lot of schools. But it's, you know, absolutely insane. I've got a couple of years of just being, you know, stunned at where, you know, who's getting into which schools, and even our students, like, you know, somebody that we you know, somebody that we would expect to get into a really good school winds up not getting into that school because their only option was to stay in San Diego because they weren't able to, they're too young to leave home yet. And so only school the student could apply to is UCSD, should go to UCSD, perfectly qualified to go to UCSD, probably would have gotten into every one of the other UCs. But just in the random sampling, just didn't meet that threshold, whatever that threshold was for UC. And we had other kids who got into UC or UCSD. So it really is a kind of a crapshoot, unfortunately.
I have a question about the crapshoot.
Yeah.
There's some talk that these schools are accepting kids from out of state because they get more money for them.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've heard that, if that's it, there's any truth to that.
So, so I've heard that same thing, and I don't really have any real information to add to this, but I do know that that there's I know that there are very specific rules. It's like there's a charter that controls the UCs and the Cal States, and so I think there are very specific.
That sounds
things
more like
that have to do-
conjecture.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question though. Did I miss it? Did you say we should be doing SATs and ACTs, or that they're no longer doing that still?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get around to answering Marnie's question there. So if you're applying to the UCs or the Cal States, they will not even look at the SATs. If you're applying to other schools, a lot of the schools, especially during COVID years, said that the SATs were optional. I'm not actually sure what world we're in now, whether they're still optional. I think the kind of the consensus was that this was a bad test. It doesn't actually indicate somebody's success in college, and so nobody should really be using this thing. But I think the schools, they want to be able to brag that, hey, only the top students are getting into the school, and the ones who got the 1,500, 1,600 SAT scores are the ones who are going to the school. So
Is it the same for SAT, for ACT? I'm sorry, I'm all confused.
Yeah. So those are kind of go hand in hand.
Okay.
So with the ACT is a slightly different test, and students who don't do well in the SAT sometimes do better on the ACT, but they're pretty much calibrated. So it's rare for students to score drastically different on one over the other. So yeah, so I think we debate this internally. You probably saw my email. We're going to be having students take the PSAT. I personally hate the College Board. The one thing that I think is really insane is that you're allowed to use a calculator on the SAT, and it has to be a very specific calculator. And so it's like, that just that sounds to me like they're basically putting money into, I think it's Texas Instruments. So
But you don't know though, right now, they're not accepting
Yeah.
SATs, but next year they could change their mind. And by
Exactly,
the
so
time
that's-
our kids,
Yeah.
my kid's a sophomore, by the time he has to take it, they may need it.
And so so the way we're kind of looking at it is get used to high stakes testing,
Mhm.
get used to filling out bubbles on Scantrons. That's going to be something that they're going to need to do at some point in the future. Maybe they're going to go to a university where that's the way, big lecture hall, and that's the way they take a test. Hopefully not. But it's important for them to get that feeling of what it's like to take a high stakes test, and to be, I remember me doing it and being bothered by a kid who was tapping their pencil next to me, and I don't know how many points my SAT score dropped because that's all I was paying attention to instead of the passage I was reading. And so that's the kind of thing that I think it's, we want them to get the practice for that. And you're exactly right that by the time our ninth graders now are applying to college,
Yeah.
the SATs might be back. Maybe it'll be in a different format.
Right.
The UCs, their plan all along was to go away from SAT but they were not gonna just not have anything. They were gonna replace it with their own new California test. So there's gonna be some kind of testing, and I think a lot of the reason now is probably gonna be just people wanting to know where they stand instead of having it just be luck whether or not you get into a school.
Eric, can you talk about if it affected the merits to have your daughter's SAT when she was applying this past year?
I laugh because so there's three kinds of schools. There's tests not considered at all, which are like the UCs and CSUs. There's test is required, which there are some schools that require the test. And then there are some that are test optional, where your kid has to decide whether to submit the test or not. And some of the schools advertise that all of their merit-based scholarships are using the test scores, so you know whether or not to submit them. Some don't advertise. What we were advised is to look at the common data set for the school you're applying to, and if your scores are in the upper end of what that school's admissions from the last couple of years look like, go ahead and submit it, because it can't hurt. If you're not in the upper end of it and it's optional, don't do it. I work at a university, and I know people in the admissions office, and what the admissions process typically looks like, if you visualize applications coming in and getting profiled and put into piles. And we don't know what the profiles are. So they're getting put into piles, and then they're making a decision to take 10 students from each pile, which is why getting your kid to stand out, whether it's with the essay or the passion project or some other thing that they've done, puts them into a smaller pile that gives you a stronger chance of getting in. I mean, what we saw this last year was kind of just blew us away, because the schools that we expected our kid to get into, she got flat out rejected from. And then some schools that we thought she had no chance of getting into recruited her. So I feel like everything has been kind of turned on its side right now, and we don't know what to expect. So I think Neil's suggestion of, apply to a wide variety of schools is the right thing to do. Just make sure your kid is not deciding this is the one and only school I want to go to, because you might end up in a bad situation. Apply to a lot. What I'll also say is there was a conversation about the cost of applications. For those of you that are going through this year, pay attention to the colleges you're interested in their Twitter feeds, because they often have days or weeks where they have, it's effectively a discount code where you can apply for free. And so you can avoid the application fees completely.
Yeah,
Wow.
I waited for one of those and it never came.
That's
Thanks for that info, Eric.
But that's true, there is that.
So while I'm looking at the screen, Ms. J, are you there? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm here. And I just, I'm here, I'm hearing everything.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to introduce you before I forgot. So Ms. J is our college counselor, college advisor. She spends most of her winters helping students with applications and reading essays and doing a whole bunch of just insane work helping our seniors get into the schools that they want to get into. So if you have any kind of general questions about applying to college, Ms. J is the one to direct those questions to. Obviously, you can always ask me as well, but I'll probably defer to Ms. J. And I think just so everyone knows kind of her process. So usually the spring is when she works with 11th graders, and then the fall is when she works with the seniors. And so she'll be with the students for a year, just kind of helping them through the process. And I'm fighting this myself with my son right now. Doesn't matter how much you're on a kid about, and Lucas, I'm sorry, you're gonna be you're the kid that we're gonna be picking on since you have to be here today. They're all procrastinators, and it doesn't matter how much you're on them. You know, October, November is going to be crunch time, and they're suddenly going to panic and realize all the things that they should have been working on all summer long. And
It's
there's only so much.
November 30th, that we're sitting late at night and panicking and writing back and so on with essays. And November 30th is like the busiest evening of the year.
Yeah, so Miss J would love to give you hours of her time right now. She'll do her best to help you on the night before, but it's probably not going to be the same amount of quality time that you're going to be spending with her, just because there's others who are also going to be doing the same. So, Miss J, do you want to say anything else? Is there anything that I missed about kind of introducing you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really an expert in many things when it comes to going to college. I went through my issues too, applying and going, and this was obviously a long time ago. I'm pretty sure my FAFSA was on and mailed, so I'm not an expert. I really do double check everything, and I'm very patient to sit down with the student and submit applications and go through essays. And essays are the most important part of your application, because you have to figure out how to stand out and be the best, to look the best. So that's most of the stuff. And I know Miss Hines does that too. We help mostly with essays and with general questions. And then if for those students who are applying through Common App, I don't know if you are all familiar with Common App. That is a app that you can through which you can apply to many different colleges. So and so Common App, basically with that, I would have to submit recommendations, transcripts, and everything else. So if your student is applying through Common App, there will be a lot for me to do on the Common App. But for UC schools, they don't accept recommendations. State schools, they don't take recommendations. So it's mostly your essays that are going to put you, in that position of whether you're going to be accepted or not. So, but the Common Apps will cover a very big number of schools. I don't know if anyone is using Common App or if anyone is applying through Common App, but that's something that we use the most.
All right, thank you, Miss J.
Sure.
So I'm just noticing some people leaving, and it is 6:30, and I said this was only gonna be an hour. So let me just quickly just look at my notes and see if there's something critical that I want to talk about that I haven't talked about. So I've mentioned all of these things at the top here. The 12% versus 20% kind of FAFSA tax.
Pretty
so
wicked. Dr. Megan, we question about applying to university abroad, and we've had a really good experience with that last year, where we had a student applying abroad, got accepted, got a full ride, and it was a longer process, but we can definitely help with that if if a student wants to come and talk to me. I don't have obviously experience with many schools, but I have done it in the past with the students. So if you just want to let me know. I don't know if you, Dr. McCurdy, know anything specific for abroad schools.
No, so just something to keep in mind is that the the process of, so specifically Europe, so they're usually looking for the International Baccalaureate degree, which is kind of like 5 years of high school gets crammed into 4 years, because college is only 3 years over there. And so students who, there was actually, my daughter was thinking about going to an acting school in England. And she was gonna have to do a whole year before she even got into the acting school of kind of this pre-college that they called it. And so the ways to get around that here are to take the Mesa College courses. So you can get most of your high school done at our school in 3 years. And so you spend your that senior year just taking a bunch of Mesa College courses. Those are gonna count as honors classes that are gonna probably match the IB program that they're expecting over in Europe. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that it's the school is only 3 years there instead of 4 years, and so that means that you've got to be more prepared in order to get into them. That's not all schools. So I think the one that you were talking about, Ms. J, I think that was actually, wasn't that an American school in Europe? I think we lost her.
Yeah, I was responding and I was on mute. Yes, it was like an American Academy abroad. But I looked at, there's a student right now who's trying to apply to some schools abroad, and we've looked at applications online, and there's one in France he's applying to. So it's doable. I mean, we can sit down and we can figure it out. It's we don't know everything, but we'll definitely figure it out.
Okay. Cool, thank you. So I talked a little bit, so CSS profile it's basically just another financial aid that some schools use. Oh, so this is actually good to know. So the schools are starting to not consider the house. So on the FAFSA, they do look at the house, but so I know Stanford and USC, again, they're kind of the ones that are experimenting with this. They're dealing with California incomes. And when you're sitting on $1 million house, that is not a $1 million house, but everyone thinks that you're a millionaire because you're living in a regular house in California. So Stanford and USC have recognized that and do not look at the house income at all. And so something to really consider here is that also means that you don't want to be mortgaging your house to pay, because increasing your mortgage doesn't make smaller. Whatever I was gonna say deduct, but I didn't feel like the right word. Doesn't make your income any smaller, because they're not even looking at the house at all. So something to keep in mind.
Is that just a few schools that aren't looking at the house, or is it most schools?
So I haven't looked at this, and I promise I'll actually look at this and follow up with an email. So I know that Stanford and USC were the kind of the bellwether ones that were starting that process. And so hopefully the rest of the California private schools have followed suit, because it doesn't make sense to look at the house and consider that part of your income. Okay, so we talked about the scattershot approach, SAT, take it can't hurt. Please brag. So this drove me crazy. My daughter, I found out after she applied to all of her schools, and now she's like, oh, phew. And now she's worried about, did I do enough? And I find out that on one of her applications that she said that she didn't speak Spanish, because in her mind, she wasn't fluent in Spanish. And I was like, you just took, Spanish 3, you're going to, I think she spent a summer abroad in Argentina. And so she was far more fluent in Spanish than I've ever been. And she didn't even think that it was necessary to mention it. Oh, and that brings up another thing that was crazy to me. So talking about ranking students, on the Cal State application, all of the volunteer stuff, all of the club stuff that you do, all gets reduced to, are you low, medium, or high on your extracurricular activities.
And
And
what is the determined? what
it's
is
the number of hours per week. And so, and it finally dawned on me, because we were always confused, like, why do kids get into UCSD but don't get into San Diego State? And it dawned on me last year, I was like, I bet it's because they put a medium on their extracurricular activities, because they were like, oh, I don't think it, because it feels like one of those,
So
like,
there's
doesn't even
self-ranking?
matter questions.
It's self-ranking, whether you're low, medium.
Yeah, no proof or backup or anything,
What?
it's
There's
just,
no, they don't require backup?
no, it was just low, medium, or high. And I don't remember exactly
high
what the
is the
numbers,
answer.
so I guess high is the answer. But maybe that's why kids were getting UCSD but not getting into San Diego State, because when you rank with those 30,000 who are all trying to get into that 10,000, like, oh, let's have this extra ranking thing, which is self-reporting on how active are you outside
Yeah.
of school.
And I'll add to that. When they're looking at volunteer work that your kid does, and there's a section for that. They're not looking at, they're looking at a consistent place you volunteered on a regular basis for a certain amount of time every week for so many months, so many years. They're not looking at, oh, I volunteered to clean up the beach once, and then I volunteered at my schools, to clean up after a school activity, and I volunteered to give food at Christmas. You can't put that in there. You have to actually say, here's the place I volunteered. I volunteered for the food bank. I volunteered every Saturday for 2 hours. I did this for 6 months. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And that's much more impressive, because you can't enter all that other stuff. There isn't a place on the application to do that.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't know that,
Yeah, that's,
someone taught me that early on, and it's good to start freshman, sophomore year doing that sort of work, because then you can say, I did it for 3 years. So whatever it is that they do, whether it's being a photographer and volunteering to do all the photography of their school, take something that you like doing, volunteer, like my son, for photography, took pictures of people in our community for free. He just offered free service to go take family pictures. He did that for a year. And he was able to say, I volunteered doing something I love. And he joined a club and was part of the San Diego Photography Association. So if your student has a passion, find ways for them to do it in their volunteer work, in their job, if they can find a job doing it, making money at it. And that's something I also didn't know, and I learned. I hired a counselor to help me. I was like, what do I do? How do I do this? Yeah, so that, I think those two things are really important, and it's important now, like freshman, right at the beginning of high school.
all right, thank you for that. That's, yeah, that's actually really helpful. I wish I had known that, so.
I know, I'm making a list of these kind of things.
So essays, expect to do more than you think. So my daughter rewrote her essays like 100 times because she thought that she needed to get everybody's input, and then usually wound up back with the original essay that she wrote after rewriting it a million times. So I think that's kind of an important thing for essays to know too. So my daughter is somebody that felt like, she's very rule bound, and like, I do this and this and this, I get an A in the class. And so she wanted to know exactly what she had to put in her essay so that she could get into that school. And the idea that there's 3 or 4 random people, each with a different opinion of what they think is a high quality candidate reading it,
So subjective.
that was really, really hard for her to wrap her mind around. And so,
Mm.
and she'd ask different people, like, oh, I like this part, but I think we should change this.
Stop
Asking, just just
Yeah. There's
ask
also,
one person that you trust and go.
there's also a really great resource called the Essay Guide, just theessayguide.com or whatever. Great. He was so helpful.
Wow.
He has videos. You can go to his website. He's got tools to help. I highly recommend the Essay Guide.
The essay guy.
Yes, and he's super motivating, and It's really good.
The essay guide or the essay guy?
Guy, GUI,
Oh, GUI.
all one word, like,
Okay.
you know, .com. So,
Okay, that's good
And
to
how
know.
much does the essay guy cost?
well, a lot of it's free. He does have a program that you can be in, and it's perfect for the school because he will try to pull out your passion. You know, what's your passion? Like, what are you into? And at this school, your passions are all being, you know, facilitated, so it's very nice. And my son had to kind of think, what's my passion? I don't know, photography maybe. It was for him. But yeah, no, there is a program you can sign up for, but there's tons of free stuff. So free videos on YouTube. I listen to him on podcasts. He's great.
All right, good
Yeah.
tip.
I can help guide my son.
So I think the last thing that I want to comment on tonight, so you'll notice that I've got a whole section on just like dealing with teenage anxiety. So this is a super stressful process, and so some kids don't handle it as well as others. So just be prepared for that. But the thing that, let's talk a little bit about letters of recommendation. So these are, if we have any younger students, these are super important, and I always tell students, like, okay, you might not like that teacher, but you don't know what you might need from that teacher in the future. And so we spend a lot of time talking about don't burn bridges. And when it comes time for letters of recommendation, that's when you don't want to burn those bridges, because maybe you've got the English essay in the bag, that's great, but you haven't had a good relationship with the math teachers and you need a math recommendation. So I don't want this at essay, I meant recommendation. So really important to not burn bridges. Really important to recognize and understand that these letters take a long time. So when I write a letter of rec for a kid, it's usually an hour or so of my time, like, because I don't want to write a crappy essay. I want to write a really good, or a recommendation. I want to write a really good one for the student. And so you've got to be mindful of the time commitment that people are putting in to write these. And so that means you don't ask them the night before. You ask them well in advance, and you don't just say, hey, write me a letter of rec. It's, hey, would you mind writing me a letter of recommendation? I'd really love it, and blah, blah. And by the way, here's all the things that I've done. So I request this anyway, so kids never listen to me. And so they ask me for a letter of rec. I say, yeah, I'll do it, but send me a list of everything that you've done and all your accomplishments, because that's going to make my recommendation be that much more powerful if I actually know that you were a leader in Boy Scouts and you're an Eagle Scout. And I could say this Eagle Scout in my letter of rec, even though I don't actually have any direct knowledge of the kid being an Eagle Scout. So the more preparation you put into those letters of rec, and that preparation starts early in the high school career, make sure you're making a good impression and being a good citizen. People are gonna remember that, and that's gonna allow them to say, this is the kindest person I've ever known, right? That's another beautiful sentence that you want to be able to write, and you can't write it if it's not true. So just keep that in mind.
But there's only one kindest.
One of the guys.
The kindest that I've seen this year. But there's been a couple where I've been able to say, this is honestly the best student that I've ever taught. And that's pretty powerful when you're able to write that. And then I think the other thing about the letters of recommendation, be prepared, especially if you're doing the scattershot approach and you're applying to a lot of different kinds of schools. They all have different requirements for how many essays they need. And my daughter, who was super on top of it and was asking people, months in advance, had to do a last minute essay request because a school that she was applying to in February said that they needed 5, and she only had, most schools were 3, and she'd already had a 4th, but she had to ask for the essay right at the last minute. And it was one of those optional, right? You can submit 5 And so does that make you look better if you've got 5 people who are, you know, is that gonna be the thing that's gonna change the ranking for you? Because, wow, there's 5 people who think she's amazing. Or, you know, does having that 5th one not having that 5th one mean that there's something lacking in who you are? So
Never know.
you never know. So just one more little piece of the stress bubble. All right, so let's stop there. I promise that we can have more of these. If there's certain topics that people want me to cover in the future or want Ms. J to cover in the future. But I don't think us talking more tonight is going to help anything. I think you guys are gonna, there's only so much information that we can all process. And I'm happy to repeat, well, this is recorded, so you can listen to me again, but if you need to hear me say it in a different way, then I can repeat some of this. And I'm only at the very early stages of my son applying. And so this is a very, very different process than my daughter applying. So he's the one that's, I don't know, there was a while there where I thought he was not going to apply to any schools. I was like, I'm not doing it for you, dude, so. But he seems like he's on it now, which is good. So sometimes they just need that deadline to be the thing that's actually going to drive them to do it.
Did you tell any of this stuff to the kids directly too? Because you know, I tried telling them, don't listen to me. So
I know.
Yeah, but I don't have that much louder a voice than you do. So.
yeah, but if they hear from a couple different angles.
Yeah, no, for sure. But it's interesting that, yeah, it's like, there's only so many ways that it's like, hey guys, no, this is really important. Like,
Yeah.
I know you hear me all day long talking about other things, but this one is really important. I feel like I do that every day. Wait, you're about to take a final exam. I'm gonna give you the advice that's gonna get you through college. I'm like, is that enough for them to listen? I don't know.
I don't know.
So any questions from online? Anyone feel like there's something that you were wishing that I had covered that I didn't? And I'm not looking at the chat at all, so I apologize if people are putting things. I see 36 messages in there, so hopefully somebody's been on that. Hopefully those are all, I see the thank you, so hopefully those are all thank you messages. All right, so I guess that's it. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you. This was fun. I think this is the best college night attendance we've ever had.
Wow.
Not the 4 of you. There's like a,
Online.
yeah. I don't know how many.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. McCurdy.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric, for your extra input there. All right, so I should stop recording. How do I do that? Right there.
Okay, well, thank